What are some of the biggest mistakes that you see real estate investors or entrepreneurs in general make around asset protection? Maybe even about the way they set up the entity, or maybe they don't set up the entity. Like, what are some of the basic mistakes that are easily avoidable but can really have a major impact? Welcome to Secure Financial Future. We're going to talk all about asset protection insights for investors. So we're going to talk about, well, I'm not, we have an amazing guest here to talk about asset protection for investors. So we're going to talk about techniques to protect your investment from legal risk and financial pitfalls, because once you make the money, it'd be nice to be able to keep it. And we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk some basic techniques, but also some advanced strategies for effective asset protection, especially around real estate, because that's what we do most. And then we're going to talk about this new thing called the Corporate Transparency Act, and then also about any kind of emerging trends or threats around asset protection. So if we have not met before, my name is Michael Blanc. I'm the host of the Financial Freedom of Real Estate Investing podcast, also the author by the same name, Financial Freedom Real Estate Investing. And we teach people how to not only buy apartment buildings by raising capital, putting deals together, but we also do it ourselves. Our investment firm is called Nighthawk Equity, and my partner and I control about $300 million of real estate. Most of our portfolios are around the Atlanta area as well. And today we have the two actual experts on asset protection. And our first one is Garrett Sutton, and he's a corporate attorney specializing in asset protection, and he is the best-selling author who has sold more than 1 million books specifically around asset protection, guiding entrepreneurs and investors. And he's been doing this for 30 years, running a practice for entrepreneurs, specializing in real estate and asset protection to maximize the financial goals through sound management and asset protection strategies. And his company is called Corporate Direct and Sutton Law Center. He has helped over 13,000 clients protect their assets and incorporate their businesses. And today also is Ted. He's actually a licensed attorney and the son of Garrett Sutton. He was born and raised in Reno, Nevada, graduated from the University of Utah with a BS in mining and engineering, which he apparently duly threw away like I did with my master's to focus on law. Fantastic. And he discovered that mining was not for him after working in a mine in Chile for several months. That's a cool thing to know. That's pretty cool. I learned I didn't want to be a veterinarian because I was a biomajor the first year, and I worked at a veterinarian for 6 months and discovered that was not for me either. So good experience for you as well. And now he's working with his dad and helping people and entrepreneurs protect their assets. So with that, welcome both of you here to the show.
Ted Thanks, Michael. Great to be here.
Yep. Thanks for having us on, Michael.
Yeah, really excited about this. It's we haven't talked about asset protection in a while, but I remember I flipped 3 dozen houses, and literally 2 days before this 3-month expiration of whatever that's called, I get a big fat lawsuit from some home buyer who sued me like for $500,000 over all kinds of ridiculous things, and it just reminded me that asset protection is a real thing. It's like having insurance. Like you don't think about it. It's not really that important. It's just an extra expense you have to put in place, extra paperwork you have to do. And if you don't do it, it'll kick you in the butt. And so we want to kind of shine a line on that. I want to start kind of more on the fundamentals of asset protection, and then kind of get a little more advanced strategies, right? But I think maybe what are some of the biggest mistakes that you see real estate investors or entrepreneurs in general make around asset protection? Maybe even about the way they set up the entity, or maybe they don't set up the entity. Like, what are some of the basic mistakes that are easily avoidable but can really have a major impact on people's wealth?
Michael, the biggest mistake is not setting up the entity, as you mentioned. And at the start, people are buying that first home, that first duplex, and they spend all their money on the down payment, and there are these ongoing costs, and they think, well, gee, setting up an LLC is a little too expensive. And sometimes you hear the CPAs say that too. My friend Tom Wheelwright hates it when I say CPA stands for can't protect assets. But you want to take advice from the attorney that, we live in a very litigious society. Attorneys get to keep 1/3 or more of what they collect on a lawsuit. And if the property is in your individual name, that means they can go after all the assets that are in your individual name. On the other hand, if the asset is in an LLC, and we don't want to put too many properties in one LLC, they can only get what's inside that LLC, which would be the equity in the property. And so they don't have as big of a reward if you do it right by suing the LLC. Now, of course, you're going to have insurance. Insurance is the first line of defense. When you buy that first duplex, you want to make sure you have insurance in the name of the duplex. If it's in your individual name, the insurance company can say, well, geez, Michael, we thought we were insuring you personally. We didn't know we were insuring the LLC. And that does happen. So the way to skin the cat is to say, okay, leave the premium in my name, but list the LLC as an additional insured. But at the start, you want to set up that entity right away.
Well, let's talk about that because people have never set up an entity before. It sounds expensive and complicated. Ted, maybe can you just talk about both of those things?
Yeah, definitely. So, there is a lot of misinformation out there. People say, oh, well, you could just set up the articles of incorporation, get a registered agent, and you're good to go. And the truth there is that you're not. If you have those things set up, but you don't do all these other additional steps, at the end of the day, you're not going to be properly protected. So, when you get the LLC, you're going to want to make sure that you get an EIN number from the IRS so you can set up a separate bank account for that LLC. And then make sure that it's adequately capitalized, that you're not commingling personal expenses there. Another thing is having an operating agreement in place that just governs how the LLC, is to be managed and if anything bad happens. And on top of that, you need to have stationery and you need to list yourself, as the manager of the LLC when you're signing contracts. So, one of the things that I see is people just do the bare bones and they think they're protected. But, when that lawsuit comes, that's really not going to protect you. You need to follow all these things that I described are the corporate formalities. And the more of them you follow, the more likely that you'll be protected when that lawsuit comes.
Now, your company, Corporate Direct, sets entities up all the time, right? We've used you before, and it costs like a few $100s to set up, and it's done within like a day, right? And so it's pretty simple. So that should not be, an argument for not setting up an entity. But you do talk about some formalities, and I think a fun fact, Garrett, I think you were interviewed by William Shatner for a split second some years ago. I had to fact check that one. That was fun. That was pretty cool.
I loved Star Trek as a kid, and to be interviewed about asset protection by William Shatner was just a highlight, I gotta say.
That was pretty cool. But and I've heard you speak about asset protection before because the basic thing is that people just don't set up the entity because they think it's too complicated and costs too much money, which it doesn't. But then there are some formalities and there are some things that one has to pay attention to because there's a thing called piercing the corporate veil. Can one of you talk about what is that thing, that piercing of the corporate veil? What does that mean? What are the ramifications if that's the case? But then how can one actually prevent that from happening?
Well, Ted will talk about piercing and I'll talk about how to avoid it.
Nice.
Yeah, so piercing the corporate veil is an analogy that's used when your business is sued. So, if you have a duplex or a fourplex and that's held in an LLC, the tenant trips and falls, they sue the LLC. Now, what they may try and do is pierce the corporate veil to pierce through the LLC to hold you as an individual liable. And the best way to avoid the piercing of the corporate veil is to follow the corporate formalities. And, these are things that I discussed, making sure you have an operating agreement, separate bank account, corporate notice, paying your taxes, having meeting minutes, all of these things. So if you follow the corporate formalities, that proverbial corporate veil is going to be more impenetrable, meaning that it's less likely that you as an individual will be held liable in that lawsuit. But, if you do the bare bones, if you just get the articles of incorporation and set up, get a registered agent and that's it, then that veil is very weak and it's very easy for that person to quote unquote pierce it to hold you individually liable.
So, Michael, there's so much to this that I wrote a whole book on it called Veil Not Fail. And it's interesting that people will pierce the corporate veil all the time now, and 50% of the time it succeeds. So that just shows you that not enough people are following these corporate formalities. So here's the deal. When you file your articles with the state, whatever state you're in, LLCs are in all 50 states. The state says, okay, we're going to give you limited liability protection. We're going to give you this veil of protection. But here's the deal. You've got to follow these formalities in order to stay protected. Now, the formalities aren't hard to follow, right? If you don't follow them and they pierce the veil, they can get at your personal assets. So that's something we really want to avoid. Because again, 50% of the time, they're piercing the veil. So as Ted said, you got to have an annual meeting. Once a year, you should meet. You got to have an annual filing with the state. In most states, you got to pay a fee. You know, Wyoming is $62 a year. California is $800 a year, and it varies in between there. You've got to have separate bank accounts. You've got to have separate tax returns unless it's a single member disregarded entity. But you have to follow these formalities. And one of them that Ted mentioned is corporate notice. So that means that when you have XYZ as the name of your LLC, you need to include comma LLC. That lets people know they're dealing not with you as an individual, but with your LLC. And so when you have a checking account, it needs to be XYZ LLC. When you sign contracts, it's XYZ LLC, Michael, the manager. And so these formalities are easy to follow. It's just if you don't follow them, you get in real trouble.
Yeah, I don't want to plug you guys too much, but you guys maintain one or more of my entities, and you do a lot of these formalities on my behalf. You do all those things. You file the fees, and you do have a meeting on my behalf, and so at least the legal part. Now I still got to have a separate bank account, and I still have to have a CPA do the tax returns. But again, the team basically does those things, and it's not very complicated to do that. And it's and therefore you're protected. Now you did mention some different states, and you mentioned they're in different states. And you know, I remember in the back in the day it was you really want to have your business in Delaware, especially if it was a syndication. Now I know, for example, that we have a Wyoming LLC. Now why one versus the other? Why one jurisdiction versus another? And do you have some recommendations about where to file these entities and why?
Well, in terms of the best asset protection states, you would include Nevada, Wyoming, and Delaware. The reason we're kind of drifting away from Delaware is they have more reporting requirements now. If you have a large number of shares, there's a franchise fee that can get pretty costly. And, you know, they're starting to change their corporate law. I mean, Elon Musk left Delaware after this case, which, you know, a lot of people thought that his deal with Tesla wasn't fair, but it was approved by the shareholders. Why wouldn't the court approve that? So a lot of people are now looking, and they have been for the last 10 years, at Nevada and Wyoming. And we like Wyoming in most cases, Michael, because they have great asset protection. They protect the single member LLC. The annual filing fee is only $62 a year, and they don't list your name on the state website. So you have a little bit extra privacy with Wyoming. Nevada's a great state. It's really the best state for corporations because they have the asset protection for corporate shares. But if you're going to just do one holding LLC for all your other properties, Wyoming is the best.
Is that what you recommend as a holding company? So you said earlier, don't put too many houses in one LLC. Like in our case, we put one multifamily building in each LLC. But you know, if you have rentals, it might be kind of tedious to put each rental into its own entity. What kind of corporate structure do you recommend?
Well, it's a judgment call, right? Are you going to put 10 properties in one LLC or 3? It's up to you. You're the client, you decide. But let's say you have 5 LLCs and we want the asset protection of Wyoming from an outside attack. Those 5 LLCs are owned by one Wyoming LLC. We don't need to set up a new Wyoming every time. And so the Colorado LLC is owned by the Wyoming LLC. The Utah LLC is owned by the same Wyoming LLC. If you get in a car wreck and someone wants to try and get at the Colorado and Utah LLCs, You don't own them. The Wyoming LLC owns them. So they have to fight through Wyoming, and Wyoming, with its excellent charging order protection, makes it tough for attorneys to get through there. So we always want to have insurance. I always recommend an umbrella policy of personal insurance, because that car wreck is one of the greatest risks out there. If you have enough insurance money that the attorneys can get at, they're not good at getting through the Wyoming LLCs, and they tend to leave you alone on that side of things. So, we offer a free 15-minute consult, and you can learn more about it. But typically we use the Wyoming LLC as the holding entity. It's kind of a blocking LLC.
What is that charging order you mentioned about Wyoming? What does that mean? Their charging order laws. What does that mean? Why is that important?
In California, if you have a claim against someone, California law says if you have an LLC, you can barge into the California LLC and force the sale of the assets. Wyoming says, no, you can't do that. You can't go in and force a sale of all the assets. What we're going to give you is what's called a charging order, meaning if distributions come through the Wyoming LLC, you'll be charged with receiving those, but you can't go in and force a sale of assets. So the charging order means that the person who has the claim against you has to wait for distributions to be made. That is not a good use of the attorney's time, who's on a contingency fee, to monitor this and check on it. And so they just tend to leave you alone with a Wyoming LLC. Again, we always recommend insurance to supplement this.
I see. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And this means that there's some kind of judgment was won, and now they're trying to get at their money. So and so it's more tedious to get that through a Wyoming, and you probably structure the entity where distributions are never made, and they would never collect. It would take a long time to collect. So that makes a lot of sense. In the asset protection world, I know the one thing that that you wanted to talk about, and it's come up on my radar this year, is this thing called the Corporate Transparency Act, and it affects basically every business in the country, and then real estate investors as well. So can you talk about what that is and why it's important and why we should care?
Yeah, so the Corporate Transparency Act, it's a law that was passed in 2021, and it took effect January 1st, 2024 this year. And what it requires businesses to do is it requires them to report personal information to the federal government. And it's the first law of its kind because usually when you set up a business, it's only done at the state level in the US. So, you set up a Virginia LLC, you're only doing it with the Virginia Secretary of State. But with the Corporate Transparency Act, you're required to report personal information to the federal government now. And this is information about the business's owners, and it's very sensitive personal information. And it affects real estate investors heavily because a lot of real estate investors hold title to properties through an LLC. And LLCs are the companies that are required to report this information to FinCEN. So it affects 30 million small businesses in this country, but it will significantly affect real estate investors, just because this is another thing that they're going to have to comply with. And if they don't do it, the penalties for failing to comply with this law are very severe. You can face up to $10,000 in fines, or if you willfully ignore this law, you can face up to 2 years in jail. So, it's unfortunate that people aren't talking about it, but this is going to have a significant impact on real estate investors all across the country.
So, okay, you have to file this thing. Like I had to go through it as well. And they want the owner, anybody who owns, I don't know, a certain percentage of it, they want their name, birthday, social security, and the name of their firstborn, and the cat and the dog. And my question is, okay, wow, how accessible is this how protected is this information? Like, right, because that's the whole thing. Hey, sometimes, like, for example, Wyoming, it's really hard to figure out who the members are or the managers are, right? Because everything is kind of shrouded. Someone have to do a significant digging. And now it seems to me like the federal government just, I don't know, putting it up on the World Wide Web or something. Like what are they doing with this information?
No, so that's actually a really good question. I'm glad you brought it up. So the government, they passed this law to go after things like money laundering and terrorist financing because, there's some people who set up shell companies where they don't report their information and then they do nefarious activities. But the thing to know about this law is that the database where all this information is stored is not accessible to the public, which is good. A lot of people think that this information's just, you can go online and search it, which is not true. But the only concern that I have is that this database is going to have information on 30 million small businesses in this country, and it has personal information about all of its owners.
It's the hacker's crown jewel. I mean,
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking.
Target-rich database. You know the
exactly
hackers are going to go after this.
Right.
Now, the government says if someone hacks this, they're going to go to prison for 5 years. Well, Michael, when have you ever seen a hacker get caught? So we'll see what happens with this. One thing to know, you have to file if you have an entity formed in 2023 or before, you have till the end of the year to file. If you file a new entity this year, you have 90 days to file the information. But, as long as the information doesn't change, you don't have to amend it. However, when you do have to supply a driver's license, an image of your driver's license or passport, when that renews, you're obligated to send in an amendment. So that's going to be what we're keeping in our database, a tickler file, so that when you get a new driver's license, we're going to remind you that you have to file with the CTA. So it's not every year, but if you have new owners that go above, what is it, Ted, 20%? 25%, or you change your driver's license, you do have to amend this filing.
Yeah, that's another cool thing, because you told me I needed to file this thing, and I was like, "What is this thing?" And that was pretty useful. I mean, there's some things that are really important, and I don't have the time to pay attention to these things and file the minutes and stuff like that. And you guys just do it. So whoever's setting up these entities, make sure that whoever's doing it, it kind of maintains those entities, because you're going to forget, and then they're going to, it'll all be for naught because you haven't maintained the formalities. So this Corporate Transparency Act, if you don't know what this, you have an LLC, you got to just Google this or contact your attorney to find out about it, because it is, the fines are pretty hefty. I was like, oh my gosh, when I first saw it, I was like, this is unbelievable. Like, what is this thing? That's amazing. So in asset protection world, so this is obviously something new. I like to think that things aren't really rapidly evolving, but what other trends do you see in asset protection? Things that people should be aware of, or kind of pay attention to?
Well, Ted, why don't you talk about the state requirements, and I'll talk about another new thing.
Yeah, so just to add insult to injury here, a lot of states are following suit with what the federal government has done.
Of course,
and they've already passed transparency acts of their own. So New York was the first. They passed the New York LLC Transparency Act, or NILTA for short, and it takes effect on January 1st, 2026. And what that means is if you have an LLC in New York, you're going to have to report that same information to the federal government, again to the New York Department of State. And so they're going to have their own database that tracks information about their LLC owners. And on top of that, there's a bill that was passed by the California Senate, and they're going to have their own Transparency Act of their own. And the thing that's different about that one is that that database is going to be available to the public. So, we are starting to see privacy get peeled back, and this is a huge pain. It's going to affect businesses, small business owners, real estate investors. So, unfortunately, it doesn't seem like we've seen the last of it, but, we're going to keep an eye out on what other states are doing. And, we're going to be here to inform people about these new laws and how it affects real estate investors.
Okay, some good news. The U.S. Supreme Court overturned the Chevron decision, and the Chevron decision said if the legislation or the administrative regulations aren't clear, the court should defer to the regulators. And, this created all sorts of problems for the last 40 years. The Supreme Court recently just said, no, we're going to overturn the Chevron ruling, and now you really have to look at what Congress intended for these regulations. And in terms of environmental protection, OSHA, all sorts of regulations that affect businesses, now Congress is going to have to be a little bit more clear on what they are seeking to regulate and what they intend. The regulators themselves cannot create what they think Congress intended. So this is going to have a huge effect for the next 20 years, and business owners and real estate investors who are subject to environmental regulations are going to find this will be to their advantage in the future.
Now, so someone listening, watching this right now, and they've made some investments in their own personal name or whatever, they have some questions around entities. Garrett, you have a lot of books out there. You really do have a lot of books out. You've been writing books for a long time. Talk about just some of the resources out there, and then maybe end kind of with some parting thoughts about kind of next steps. Yeah, next step.
Right.
So next steps to someone who really wants to kind of fix this problem, or even maybe audit what they have.
Right. And so the key book, I think, for your guys, Michael, is Loopholes of Real Estate. And this talks about the asset protection and tax advantages of investing in real estate. And, we also have Start Your Own Corporation about incorporating and all. But I think Loopholes for your type of investor is probably the book to read. And so if you read the book, we're giving you the information you need to make the right decision. At Corporate Direct, we offer a free 15-minute consult with an incorporating specialist. You can see what we charge, what we offer, just, see if there's a fit. And we'd be happy to work with people. But, the thing is, Michael, that they don't teach this in school. And so you have to get this information on your own. And one of the things we're also doing is we're creating a streaming platform where we're providing financial education for parents and kids. We have a show called Cool Kids Money Smarts, where your kids can go and learn about financial education. So that website is called Sunstream, SUNN, stream.com. And Ted's written a free book that you can download from Sunstream. So why don't you talk about your book, Ted?
That's right. So my book is titled The 5 Tricks to Teach Your Kids About Money. And, the reason I wrote it is that parents would ask me, how exactly do you teach your kids about money? And so I boiled it down to 5 concepts that parents can, 5 strategies and concepts that they can use to boost their kids' financial IQ. So if you head on over, it's sunstream.com, sunstream.com/5 tricks, and you can download the book for free. Right now, I've had 200 people download a copy of it. I'm trying to close the gap on my dad, who sold $1 million. So
Yeah.
Just whoever, just the more the merrier, the better for me.
Well, and it is free.
Yep, and it's free. You don't have to pay for it either.
I love that, because you said these things are not taught in schools. This is one thing that are not taught in schools. Is super irritating, right? So they should hand out Rich Dad Poor Dad to everybody in school, and then your book as well. Just how money works. It's amazing what these kids, they're just not learning these basic things. And then even entrepreneurs, they don't know about asset protection. And even though, you mentioned insurance is not really part of necessarily what you do, it's part of asset protection. So, you're going to advise people, hey, do you have an umbrella policy in place? If someone wants to connect with you and have them do an audit on their business, where do they go? What is your website for that?
Yeah, so you can go to corporatedirect.com and you can schedule either a free 15-minute consultation with one of our incorporating specialists, or you can call the number. It's 775-824-0300. And if you have any legal questions, you can set up a 30-minute consult with either my dad or myself. My rates did go up, so you'll have to pay a little bit more now. But
we're available by phone. So a lot of people, you go to some of these sites and there's no phone number. We answer the phone and we'll get on the phone with you. And if you do have some cleanup issues, don't worry about it. I mean, you just need to take steps to put the right things in place. Don't tell anyone that you don't have it set up right. Just contact us and we'd be happy. We do it for a lot of people. We just call it a cleanup service. And it's not difficult or expensive, and we'll get you cleaned up properly.
Yeah, you guys have been really easy to work with, so really appreciate that. Check out all of Garrett Sutton's books. Certainly, Loopholes for Real Estate is a good starter right there, and check out Corporate Direct. So, thank you both for being on here and shining a light on something that we haven't talked in a while, but is very important. So, thanks for being on the show today.
Our pleasure. Thank you, Michael.
Yep, thanks for having us on.